This is a particularly difficult subject to deal with, basically because we don't really have any answers, as is probably sort of fairly clear, really, in yesterday's conference, where the word value kept appearing and probably wasn't really being effectively answered. This session is really from around the perspective of the fact that that there are businesses to be run, that it is actually a livelihood, it is a living wherever you are in the film business, that there are aspects to it that you're going to want to pay your mortgage with, and so on and so forth, and that there is some kind of reward or decent reward for people to be incentivized to actually work in the film industry, in the film business, on all aspects to it. Now the issue, really, the interesting thing about this is from my perspective at the Film Council, is that there are no or very little attempts, especially by the independent sector, to try and wrestle with what this kind of evolution or revolution actually might mean to people's businesses. Now that's the same whether it's in the production sector, whether it's in the distribution sector, whether it's in the exhibition sector, and so on and so forth. There's a vague feeling of rabbits in the headlight kind of thing. It's kind of slightly perturbing. We do have a rather interesting project with Nesta, where 12 different film companies are coming together, some of whom have, of all different types of the industry, some of whom have absolutely no idea what they wanted to do, but just knew they needed to do something, which is an 18-month program to try and put them together with some consultants and develop some kind of strategic thought or view in terms of how their businesses might evolve, and they can take advantage of what's happening as opposed to it taking advantage of them. So I think that's the kind of the perspective of this. But I mean, I don't think there's any particular answers at all available at the moment, and there aren't any particular models in effect for those more traditional sectors: production, distribution, exhibition, retail, in terms of what this might look like. But I'll start off really, and then I'm going to throw it open because you're going to help me on this. I do quite a few sort of workshops, digital workshops and so on, and they generally take like 1 day or 2 days, where I work with sort of groups of people in Europe and so on, and try and figure out what things might look like, introduce them to the issues around digital and what it might look like. And I did one in Belgium fairly recently, another one in Rome, and there was quite some interesting conclusions on it. But I'll go through the kind of the sort of the Belgian one in a sense. It was a workshop with festivals, cinemas, a distributor, and a film magazine, interestingly, who were trying to sort of figure out what they were going to do and what they were about it. And the kind of thing that came out of it was on the it was kind of one of the most interesting ones was actually the magazine. The magazine, which is the leading film magazine in Belgium, I can't remember what it's called, was actually had no online presence, and was a subscription or transactional pay-for model, and was wondering how or what it was going to do and evolve in this system. And it kind of surprised me really, because if one looks therefore at other aspects of where newspapers have gone, which is an evolving business model, which I think has surprised some of the newspapers. But when you get, when the newspapers started off on the internet, they tried basically to have a subscription-based model or a transactional model, a paid-for model. So you would put your newspaper on, and maybe you read the front page, and then you'd either have to subscribe, or put your email address in, which is a drag or whatever it is, or through to actually paying for it and paying for content. Now, for those of you who follow this, whatever it is, I think it was basically the first national newspaper to really get hold of what the internet was The Guardian. And The Guardian newspaper put everything online for free, for no registration, so there was no transactional kind of thing in there, and leapfrogged above all of the other newspapers online, and still the largest online read newspaper in the UK. I think it's got something like 18 million visits a month. The Daily Mail, interestingly, is coming up behind it, but and took the lead position on there, and almost in a leap of faith, You know, it was the old kind of eyeballs position. It was counterintuitive to what the other people were doing. So, like the LA Times, the New York Times, the FT, the Washington Post, the Telegraph, etc., either had restricted presences on the web or they were asking people to pay for it. And the interesting thing about The Guardian is mixed up with kind of behavioural advertising as well on the internet, which I've only just become aware of, and I might touch on that in a minute because it's a bit scary. But the interesting thing about The Guardian is that they actually began to be read, highly read in America. Do you know any of this? It's actually, they got a lot of viewers from America, because American people quite like, you know, newspapers from the UK. First of all, it's in English, or just about, according to them. But secondly, they get sort of a different perspective, or even some detailed stuff that they don't actually get from the newspapers in America, possibly exception of the New York Times. But so then suddenly The Guardian's got a new business, because where before, you know, clearly you'd only carrying adverts that were available in the UK, they began to realise that they could carry like US adverts, and a whole new revenue stream began to flow through. I'm absolutely pretty certain that that was actually not the case in point when they were setting this off. I think it was, you know, like a leap of faith in terms of what it was. We need to do this, we're just going to get it. So there you have a kind of like an example of a kind of a complete evolution of a newspaper in the last 2-3 years, and became the leader of this in terms of people reading it online, possibly through this sort of act of faith, but also a kind of strategy, which was we've got to get digital. We just have to get digital. Going back to the film magazine in Belgium, I gave the example to him, etc., and it became extremely difficult for him to conceptualize the value of what he'd got if you put it online for free. You know, the back catalogue, the reviews, all the kind of stuff, you know, that some of the data there, or indeed the fact that he had a fairly loyal readership that he could expand, and that he could, on an online environment, if he kept the eyeballs going, began to extend some of his business offers, you know, and links with distribution or talker screenings for new films, or all the kind of thing that a two-way communication thing can build. So it was a kind of like a shuddering process of thought as they went through that from analog to digital stuff, and then he began to bulk over the word, in this case, the word free. We'll turn to the cinema aspect of this. Now, cinemas are kind of like, cinemas are, you know, in the world at the moment, and probably will continue to be for a bit, are very strongly hermetically sealed organisations. You know, they are entirely driven by product coming in, and then opening the doors, and then you know, the audiences come in or don't come in according to what they have decided that those audiences want. In other words, their philosophy, in terms of what they are, is basically, it is, you know, if you wanted to draw it, it's like a hard-lined circle. You know, I own my retail space, I open it up according to what I think people want. People come in if they want to, and then they don't come in. It's not, but it's my space. This is what I do. That's what it is. And then, as we sort of worked through that workshop, etc., it became sort of like apparent that, and I'm kind of interested in this, but it became apparent that the cinema in the future could, using some digital technologies and so on and so forth, actually not be the cinema space at all. But actually they were kind of like holding an empty space of which the consumers would decide what they would fill it up with. And I don't just mean the cinema on demand aspect to this, which is the one aspect to it, but you know, the consumers would be telling the cinema what indeed they would like to see and what they'd like to have, and the cinema would then respond by facilitating what the consumers actually were telling them by using whatever techniques they got to listen to people, and telling them exactly how you'd fill that space. And I kind of like, and those were, so the examples could be anything from weddings to birthdays to particular films to someone coming in on a community cinema basis and booking it as a film society, through to whatever it is, okay? But the kind of older model, or the old existing model, this is my space and I tell you what you're going to see and you come in and see it, is kind of a fluid one, and I'd be extremely interested to see or to know or to look at a kind of a new alternative thing, which you can only do with digital technology that allows people to communicate backwards and forwards. Then I went to a workshop in, I did a workshop in Rome, and I packed off these people to look at their film and all their company, production company, they were all producers, to have a look at and see what kind of strategy they would employ in the digital world for either their film and or their company. And it's fair to say that neither of them, hardly any of them, had ever thought about a digital strategy whatsoever in any form or at all. They were very traditional producers whose job was to make the film and then worry about what happens afterwards, you know, and so on, which is the classic model, which I'll come back to actually, and so on. But the first person up was a Finnish bloke, young, they're all young, and he outlined a model that kind of like was extraordinarily radical, or at least I'd not really come across this before. And what he said he was going to do is he basically, in the same way actually that the cinema was the case, he was going to break down the kind of hermetically sealed aspect to his company. It was no longer going to be, I make films in isolation in my company and then pop out at the end of it and see where I can do with it. He actually was put forward a model which basically he had kind of like inner sanctum or ambassadors or privileged members or whatever you want to call it, but groups of people which he wanted in as many territories or countries around the world as possible. Not many, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 people or whatever in these countries. And he would part reward them in terms of, you know, by making them members of his production company. He'd part reward them by stuff, but he would also bring them inside some of his production processes. So in terms of like, you know, what films they might like to look at, does this script look okay, does this poster look alright, does this trailer look alright, and so on and so forth. But he was also wanting to use them as like eyes and ears, and marketing eyes and ears in that country, so that he would have a better handle in terms of what they might want to do in China, in India, or whatever it is, when it came to actually the finished film going out there. So who's watching what? Who's seeing things? You know, what are the sort of areas that you might want to look at? Who are the most influential, you know, web blogs in that particular country? The kind of research on their own, you'd either have to pay for, or indeed it'd been very, very difficult to do. So what he created there, in a sense, is the same kind of like business development thought process, which was that he was breaking down the boundaries and blurring them between, you know, his organisation and his consumers, and by incentivizing a sort of group of privileged people that would be privileged and therefore give him information. So it'd be a two-way flow of stuff. You know, I give you something, you give me data back, information back. And I thought that was an incredibly smart piece of thinking about how one can effectively try and utilize aspects of, you know, communities or audiences, not only just to inform you to inform you to be a buyer of my product, but also to help to inform me about how I should market my product, where I should go with it, and indeed what the product might look like in the first place. So that's a kind of like, you know, those are the kind of things. Now, these are just like theoretical, I mean, they really are at the moment theoretical examples in terms of what's going on. And I think that to go back to my opening remark, is that on the whole they are still theoretical examples, especially in the UK, which has a particularly I would say, unadventurous film sector, especially and a particularly unadventurous production sector for all sorts of reasons, about formulating new models to try and get my films out there and get the right films made. Now, in the conversations or the themes that came out of yesterday, or the things that jumped out at me in terms of like, how would I, you know, what kind of issues would I be facing when in terms of like trying to construct a kind of different model or a new model? The first one really was, I felt, was gatekeepers. I don't think there was one presentation there yesterday that had any gatekeepers in it whatsoever. I can't recall it. There was certainly, yeah, I mean, not one. So, you know, now we actually live, as has been described, in a world of gatekeepers. I mean, the majority of the film business is just about gatekeepers. And in fact, we're extremely used to gatekeepers and so on. And the challenge really on this is in terms of in formulating a business, is what we generally do is we complain about other gatekeepers, but I'm okay as a gatekeeper. I understand my gatekeeper role because I know what I'm talking about. It's all the other bastards that don't know what they're talking about and won't buy my film or book it on the screen or buy it on television or whatever it is. So there is actually quite a considerable challenge if you're going to remove the gatekeeper completely in terms of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve or do in your particular, you know, like sphere of the world, in terms of, well, if I do take that route of extreme democratization, of ultimate audience control, of audience decision making is the key thing, whatever it is, you know, whatever the particular driver it is, what does that actually do to my particular business? What does it mean to me? And that's probably particularly interesting when it comes to things like production. you know, or writers, or screenwriters, or scriptwriters, or directors, and so on and so forth, you know. So a big question around this, and I'm sort of intrigued by this, is how far the gatekeeper or the annihilation of a gatekeeper role actually is reasonable to be put into a particular part of the film business, and how reasonable that is in terms, especially in the creative process. Because I think that, you know, like a lot of the creative process is driven by a passion, you know, as witnessed by M.Zero and doing his stuff in the basement. And the concept or idea that you know, that the scriptwriter may actually throw their script open, or the film director will throw their film open, whatever it is a huge conceptual leap creatively. So how far would that gatekeeper role go back? So if I am running a production company, do I actually hermetically seal my creatives, or if I am a creative myself, do I hermetically seal myself from this, and if so, how much? You know, how much is it a passion-driven project that pops out at the end? Or am I actually not quite so interested in my own individual passion and what this is, and perhaps more interested in what people might want to actually, you know, like what their interest might be, and I'll respond to those. There's a really, really tricky kind of like things to consider when you're practically, on a practical basis, forming something, creating something, producing something, and so on the construction, on the creative side of it. Gets slightly easier on a no gatekeeper model on the other side of it, the distribution side of it, and so on. So that's the first kind of like thing that came out of it. The second thing that came out of it was the really solid theme was community, and you know, there was a community, but whatever. Perhaps again, you know, not almost everyone, but practically every presentation yesterday talked about building communities, whether it's your audience community, film festivals communities, film production community. You know, if you want a camera, you borrow it off a film community. So, you know, there was a huge reliance on a basis of the concept of if you like, of mutuality as much as of self-help, of group self-help, as much as it was about understanding your audience clusters. Now, that's kind of an interesting one, and it was your you know, the German model, you know, yes, where you've built a community of a business model based around a community or mutual benefit for documentary filmmakers. Correct? Who got together, you got 800, yeah? You got 800 documentary filmmakers together, you know, who saw a mutual benefit to build something that had, you know, that could, you know, build a correspondingly audience community who would actually buy, you know, films on that, you know, from that website and monetize something that you were struggling to monetize, and get around a structural problem of television through the gatekeeper role, not actually, you know, showing or responding on, you know, to and financing the movies. Now the challenge on that is, and I've been kind of like, you know, again, I mean, it makes you think. I made me think that conference yesterday. Like all this stuff makes me think, and so on. But I said, look, well, you know, how much of that is a cultural thing, and how much of that is an economic driver? Because, you know, like if you're trying to build, for example, exactly a model like that, but you try and do that in the UK, right? All my instinct is that however beneficial that might be, at the moment, for whatever reason, trying to bring a lot of small documentary filmmakers together, for example, in the UK, around what should be a mutual benefit of monetizing their back catalogues or whatever it is, just goes like it's not going to happen. It just won't happen. I mean, it's just like, you know, wherever we, you know, Europe, for some reason, is much more, you know, in other countries, it seems to be much more, in the films, culturally able to bring people together, Scandinavians especially, around a particular business issue that they're trying to resolve. Like, I think there's a big group based, it is Scandinavia, I think, who have, of a lot of independent distributors and content owners who have come together over an organisation, a group, and have said that this group will handle my rights, my online rights, because we can't deal with my online rights separately. Well, no, and Apple won't return my calls. But, you know, if you've got a number of film titles out there, Apple will return my calls, or maybe we'll get a better deal, and we won't get 50-50, which is the standard deal. Maybe we'll get what the studios get, 70 my side and 30, you know, and so on. So, but again, that's a kind of mutuality. So this next sort of point about this really is how you know, the cultural aspect of mutuality and where it fits. I mean, I'm puzzled by this one, and maybe, you know, with the recession here, there may be a bigger economic push for for example, in certain areas in the independent sector, for people to actually get together around a particular model and create a community to deliver something, as well as figuring out how to create a community for my individual film. So, and third point about yesterday, which is probably the trickiest one, and then I'm going to kind of like sort of throw it open for, you know, like a brief discussion. I'm very interested to know like quite who's in the room and what your thinking is and what your plans are, whatever, and have a chat about it. We've only got 50 minutes to solve this. The third point about the room is obviously the word value. Now, if there was one thing I would say that was missing out of yesterday's thing was actually the word value. Now, there was a kind of disconnect. You know, there's loads of people on stage who are basically either not telling us what the numbers were, because they don't want it on record, because Inland Revenue might find out. I actually thought of that, actually. Why won't they tell us a number, you know? But, you know, so there's quite a lot in terms of the value, or indeed taking a rather a sort of creative extreme view, which is that you're not here to do it for value, for money, and that actually you're here to actually, you know, doing it because you want to do it. You just love doing it, and that's what it is. I particularly like the question that someone asked, you know, what do you do in your day jobs? You know, have you got any money? You know, one of you were there from that bloke that right towards the end of the panel asked that question. I thought it was a great question, didn't get an answer. And so on. So there's a kind of like, you know, the value aspect of this is absolutely crucial. And it is, you know, I think one of the single most difficult aspects of what is being discussed at the moment in terms of what the internet is, how on earth do I get value back? What is my business model? What do I do? Am I going to be like the Guardian and just stick it out there and hope that something pops up at the end of it? A bit like the BitTorrent guy, you know, just sticks it on BitTorrent and asks for $15 at the end. Or do I, you know, and so on, or, which is a strategy. I just lob it away and see what happens. Or can I build something that I think has a chance of having some kind of like, you know, value-driven thing back to me, you know, of delivering something back that enables me to pursue whatever my strategic aim is, whatever I'm actually doing inside whatever my construct in the film business is, whatever my role is, wherever I want to be. So those are the kind of like the sort of like some couple of examples in terms of, you know, theoretical examples in terms of how you know, a community cinema, I suppose is what I sketched out, or, you know, a community sort of based production company that's much more liberal in the way that it relates, or much more open in the way that it relates to its audience. And the three themes are no gatekeepers, build communities or have communities involved in it, and what on earth do we do about value, which is probably what this is about. So that may be worth kind of thinking about. Now, can I just now throw it kind of open in a sense to sort of free form a little bit on the next 20 odd minutes that we got, to just sort of like figure out, first of all, who are the businesses in this room? Who's production? So, what else? Who else have we got in here?
Post-production.
Oh, you've got post-production. That's interesting. You're both post-production. Huh.
Distribution, myself.
So, any distributors?
I work at Channel 4. I run 4Docs, which is
Oh, do you?
Channel 4's online documentary.
And how's that going?
Pardon?
How's that going?
Yeah, it's going okay.
How many downloads are you doing?
We don't get downloads, we stream.
You abandoned downloads, have you?
We stream the films
Yeah.
under Creative Commons license. You can never download them. So
Oh, right,
you can watch
okay.
them on site. We've actually just moved into Rightcode Player, and we got the code because we want people to spread the films.
Yeah.
But the site's set up for the filmmakers.
Right, that's right. So it was never a download model.
No.
It was only
It's
streaming.
not money, it's
Okay.
like to find talent, to feed talent into Channel 4.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
designed with the filmmaker.
And how many streamings do you get?
How many? We probably
People
get about
watch.
sort of 40,000 hits a month.
Oh, what people are actually watching movies?
Yeah, or come visit, yeah, come on site, people are good looking stuff.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how much do you pay to the filmmakers?
Pardon?
How much do you pay to the
Nothing.
filmmakers?
We don't pay the filmmakers, but I work with 3 Minute Wonder, so I've just done a competition where I put a theme out of my hometown and people submit films, and I'm putting 4 of them on TV, and each filmmaker gets £1,500 and they keep all the rights and they get a broadcast credit at prime time.
So it's a competition.
Well, that was a competition that I ran, but it's not always.
And the others just send the film? Or is this stuff you purchased for TV and you got the streaming rights right with it?
People make content and then they upload it and send me a link, and different people review it, and Yeah, then we put some on TV and some on the internet.
So what's I mean,
exploiting people. So
well, that's an
to
interesting
repeat
point.
what was said yesterday in the.
It's one person's exploitation and another person's benefit. You know, so it's a very difficult one. I mean, like,
Sorry,
I mean,
who's benefit?
Sorry, consumer.
Well, who's the benefit? Where's the benefit there?
Consumer, and possibly filmmaker.
Plus the filmmaker, because if correct me if I'm wrong, you're there to find new talent for Channel 4.
And then they get paid commissions if
Right.
they're good.
So just the same way as a short film, you might find the benefactor that will give you £50,000 to make a short film, and you can explain your talent, demonstrate your talent with you, your crew, your writing staff, and all the rest of it. You're not going to make any money back on that short film. I don't think anybody ever expected to, even in the old days. But this is, I mean, to be fair to you, because I think you've put your head on the block a little bit, intentionally. There is a mutual benefit, and I'm completely commercial filmmaker, and for me it is a livelihood, so it's very important. But if I elected to put one of my films on there to think it would give me benefit, it's my choice.
And it is designed, you have to look at the terms. So like if I put a film up and then you sell it to another, you sell it to someone who's going to give you lots of money, I'll take down the film. You need to look at who's making the terms and who's interested in.
I mean, the interesting thing, we won't concentrate too much on you because I think there's a. But I mean, the interesting thing about the sort of landscape at the moment in terms of business models, in terms of online at the moment, is probably it's being dominated by the TV companies in the UK, and the BBC iPlayer is clearly a huge hit. I mean, it's an enormous hit. It's free. I mean, it's free. I mean, has anyone come across Chris Anderson's Free Economics? Have you read that yet? Right, who's read it? You read it? Yeah, frightening, isn't it? I mean, actually, you know, that in terms of trying to put together a business model or whatever it is, I mean, I'll probably read his. I mean, you might not agree with anything he says, but it's certainly worth reading. It's Chris Anderson, the guy that basically analysed and brought into the public domain the concept of the long tail. He's written an article which is shortly going to be called Free Economics. It's basically saying that everything on the internet is going to zero cost, and therefore it's free, and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's the way it is. Now, you know, and how do you get newspapers, for example? Yeah.
But I guess the point he makes, which seems to be the model that's developing, is that it's ad supported. I mean, that's what The Guardian Unlimited does, and that's certainly what the studios are doing. I mean, Fox and NBC have teamed up to set up Hulu.com, which is a great site, I think, and they've put all their content for free. It's just ad supported, and we listen to YouTube. I mean, they're doing the same thing. So I guess the question is how you bundle all these rights under a website that has a brand and that can, you know, therefore attract people who want to get into that advertising space in the internet, of which there seems to be a lot of companies. But the problem is, yeah, as you say, in the UK, it's just there's a lot of single producers, so it's not worth, you know, I put my film in my site for my film.
Yeah.
So I guess the good thing about Channel 4 is that they do have that brand that says young filmmakers from the UK.
Correct. I mean, and the iPlayer, which of course is coming out in the sense of taxpayers' money. I mean, like it's via the license fee. And you know, the BBC are probably sitting on the biggest single intervention in terms of the online space, probably since Facebook arrived in that sense. I mean, it's allegedly taking up 5% of all internet traffic, and so on. Now it's enormous, especially after the move from download to streaming. When it was download, it didn't work. Now it's streaming, it's worked. At the moment, the BBC's thing at the moment is basically 7 days, 7-day catch-up, and that was a negotiation with the rights owners and so on and so forth. That it was an extension of the BBC television experience, and therefore basically covered by the license fee and the fee paid to the filmmaker, the program maker, and so on and so forth. But clearly, that is going to migrate, and that as this move changes, it's going to migrate. It's probably going to extend in time. It's going to extend in reach. It may well have archive in there, as opposed to just like what's happened in the last 7 days or 21 days or whatever it is. Channel 4's 30 days, isn't it? Yeah. And that's paid for as well, isn't it?
Some stuff's paid for.
So some stuff's paid for, yeah. Which is, and so on. I'd be interested to know how much that model can sustain itself, and I don't know the numbers. I do know that the numbers on Channel 4's film download site, which is paid for download, are very common with a lot of download sites, and are tiny. And very, very, very small numbers that are actually being downloaded by people, even off a brand like as large as Channel 4 and so on, which is quite an interesting observation again about either the convenience of download and the DRM issues behind it, another issue, or indeed the word free. So the iPlayer is kind of interesting, and then we've got Kangaroo appearing, which is a joint venture between BBC Worldwide, which is the commercial arm of the BBC, Channel 4 and ITV, which is currently going through the OFT at the moment, the Office of Fair Trading. But that potentially is like an enormous amount of content going into this site. It's called Kangaroo at the moment, but they're thinking of calling it Seesaw. I think it's a brilliant name. I saw it. I think Seesaw is brilliant. Anyway, some people think it's stupid. I don't think it's great. But you know, and that is, if that gets the clearance, it'll be an interesting one if it doesn't. But if it does get the clearance, you're going to have this huge central site of TV, probably some of it paid for, and probably a lot of it free, and depending on the model and the ad model and the advertising, and where one like the BBC iPlayer will have advertising on it. And so, and that's the kind, you know, and then you go, well, what's the model there? You know, is it free? Is it paid for? You know, what's the search engines? How good is the search engine? What's my principle behind this? Am I on a long tail thing where I can just search anything? Or am I on a promotional thing whereby, you know, like I'm going to push certain content to people, the front page issue or whatever it is and so on. What is my, you know, underlying kind of like consumer-facing business model that I'm starting off with and might want to evolve with? And what is potentially an enormous kind of like change next year to the way that we are able to get hold of effectively and consume media online. So that's kind of, I suppose, another example really of some of the kind of things that kind of like facing and so on and so forth.
Well, iPlayer is not free. I pay for iPlayer through my TV license.
Correct, which is why it is free.
And I paid for the commercial stations through my SOPAP.
Correct.
Although it's not free, what it is the people getting the money are different. And the thing is that what is clear from what is interesting about what's taking place here, the fact that I think it's so significant that streaming works better than downloads. It's instant, it's there for a moment and it's gone. You know, and when I go online, I don't expect to pay for anything, it's there and it's gone. It's a moment. So in a sense, that's the community bit. I'm part of that. And that the models for actually making some money out of it are not the widget model where you get a percentage of this and you go. So you've got to think of it in a different way. And the idea of a sort of Fordist model of you make a film and then you can circulate it to so many people just won't work in these days. So it's a much more, you have to look for a more differentiated business model. And you talk about cinemas. You know, in a sense, the cinema is a space. You know, and one of the things about cinemas is they really, really, really know their audience. They kind of have a demographic, they know who the people are. And if you take that sensibility and spread it, so if a cinema just moves online using the same methodologies that they use to understand their audience in their region, they could create a virtual space in that cinema as much as they could in the physical space. And so, but what is the return? How much will it be? And what can you expect? And if you try to, in a sense, do the simple IP ownership percentage points, mass distribution, give me the money, then the consumer has shifted that dynamic. The consumer is saying no. But, you know, it's either.
So what's the consumer saying? I'm not going to pay, or I'll only pay little
they
bits.
They say I won't pay for all of it.
Right.
But they're paying for stuff that's good.
That's right.
Yeah, pay for quality as well. Because lots of the models yesterday were talking about being used online as a way of advertising to building an audience, but people can still buy. They can still buy the DVD, they can still buy a T-shirt, they'll still go to the cinema for an experience which you can't get online.
Yeah.
So it becomes the way to make money out of it is you sell the quality aspects, you sell the quality of a DVD or a Blu-ray, or you sell the experience of the cinema. You make the cinema into an experience by inviting your audience along to do it together as a, you know, like singing along to Happy Film about the Bee Gees,
Crappy film about what, sorry?
ABBA. ABBA. Yeah, you're doing well.
Could we go back to something that I think may require a deeper level of thinking? And it's very easy when we whip ourselves into a frenzy about how to monetize things and as our host has pointed out, for some of us it is actually a business.
Yeah.
And,
Well, no view.
that's very important.
Yeah.
And that's to remember the viewer. My theory is, going back to something you said earlier about collaborative filmmaking with online audiences, or getting out distribution for a second, I think the appeal of storytelling, hearing stories and telling them, is the fact that we don't know where they're going to go. There's always, the ancient Greeks will tell us all about dramatic structure and how it works, and that's never changed because it's human psychology. And there are certain ways to tell stories, and there are rules that can bend, but basically it's psychology. So, as a consumer, I don't really want to determine how that story is going. I think it's a gimmick, but if I'm determining how a story is going, it becomes a game, which is something else. Equally, there is a psychological reward and a way to monetize that, but things are different things, it's not a movement. And second of all, I think the success of the BBC iPlayer, which I can't look at because I use a Mac, is because it's scheduled. And this sea of on-demand content, whereas I can watch, there's a lot of talk about empowering the viewer to watch whatever they want, whenever they want it. And actually, I don't believe that they always want that. I think people want to be, where do I look? There's the watering hole, I know exactly what I'm going to get. At 7 o'clock, the news is on, and I must watch the news because that's my habit, because we are creatures of habit. And rather than bombard them with a room full of stuff where your quality content will just get lost or people will not know, if you schedule things and market them in a very easy and accessible way, I think people will come and look at them.
Anyone agree with that? Or disagree?
I was
It's the old model.
Exactly. It's the psychology of the old model.
Yeah, and psychology is a moving feast as well. I mean, we're understanding the psychology of the process. Aristotle, absolutely, it works. But it was interesting to sort of to ask those people, what is the story structure for those? I've not seen any of these films, so I'm going to look at them after this session. Are they any good? Is the sort of question that is only answered by the number of people that watch them all the way through.
Well, I think there's an interesting point there, because the concept of good is not something that sits particularly easily in some of the thinking and ideology around this, in the sense that if you ask someone, is it any good, what they'll actually say is, well, the only way that it's any good is if the audience say it's any good, which is not up to me, because that's a gatekeeper role, to decide whether I decide this is the lead review, I'm a film critic, or a programmer, or a TV buyer, or whatever it is at the moment, or or I'm a brand that I think that I've got value by my filtering of stuff for the consumer to have a look at. That's kind of like the old world bit. The new world bit goes, the only people that decide whether it's any good or not are the people that that are on my website. Hence ratings, hence people searching for now, hence people downloading now. No,
that's not true. They said, is it Aaron? Yeah. Aaron did a talk today, this morning, and he said there's a rule to get reviewed in newspapers. You have to have a screening for at least a week.
And in America, he said.
Oh, in America. So he said it was really important that he did have that screening for 1 week. So he was eligible to get reviews because he wanted reviews by professional critics.
Yes, sorry, I get me wrong. I'm not saying that you don't want them. I'm saying that that they have a particular brand value. I mean, I'm picking up your point really of whether people, as to how people make their decisions, or how or we feel they make their decisions. So if I get 5 stars, New York Times or Guardian or whatever it is, does that affect or enhance the rub off of that particular brand value? Somebody who must know what they're talking about because I kind of like The Guardian actually has a beneficial effect on my stuff, on my film. But the countermart to that, or the other aspect to it, is that the consumer is the people that will decide if it's good or not, and that of equal word of mouth, and that of equal or more value is what other people are thinking and saying about this film. I capture that information, feed it back to people in an egalitarian, democratic way, Amazon, Love Film, or whatever it is, and that then decides whether this is a decent film or not. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think that you're looking at it in a very simplistic way. Because
Probably.
I think that what viewers, general people, non-critics, you need to learn whose opinion to weight more. On a lot of these sites, like on Current TV, it's how active a user you are is like how much you trust people's opinions.
So in that
just like the critic
okay.
and then the man on the street.
So in that case then, I mean, this is a really interesting discussion, because when it goes back to trying to figure out what it is that I, you know, what my position is, or what I'm taking, that therefore, if you are right, therefore that there will continue, that there is and will continue to be, audiences will be searching for an authoritative figure, brand, just hold on a second, that's important enough psychologically for me to say, you know, the teacher, the equivalent of, you know, the parent or whatever it is, that tells me that this is good and this is okay, or this is not good, this is not okay. And therefore the brand position I might want to take as a film production company, words like quality, we make quality films, that actually is a genuinely good position to take, right? As opposed to, we make horror films, or whatever it is, you know, we make a type of film, or I make fiction film, or whatever it is.
But so implicit in your argument is the same principle. Aristotle didn't suddenly wake up and work out what all the best plans were. What it is, people sat around campfires and said, we don't want the princess to get raped. We want the princess to live happily ever after. You know, the audience defined those models. And the thing is that then the experts arrive. It's a relatively new invention. It's 2,000 years old.
Storytelling.
And what this digital revolution is doing is reinventing the campfire. What's happening, you have the moment. It's not held in this text that's solid. It's a moment that passes. And so what's happening is, it is being reinvented. And that the role of the reader in that process is a really important fact. So implicitly, you can't get out the fact that you think the gatekeeper ultimately knows best. It's implicit in what you're saying.
But what is being reinvented is the access to the campfire. I mean, it's the gatekeeper. I mean, the critic is, I don't mind about the critics, I'm about the prescriptors now. I want a recommendation in my, if I have a horror film, I don't know, from Wes Craven, that's valuable to me, but not a critic anymore. Depends on the film, the prescriptors, and then on the audience, and the audience becomes prescriptors. And for example, what's going on with Harry Speed and Cool News and so on. Now, if there's a really bad film, you can't hide it anymore. You know people, if you're going to a certain demographic, young audience, they know the shit. They're going to know it. So you can no longer have thousands of prints and taking them out in the first weekend. But they don't even go to the first weekend because they know it's bad. But it goes with certain audience. And then again, film is not only a teenager audience. There are people over 40 that are going to the movies. I think that in Europe we are mainly doing film for people in their 30s, which are the ones that are not going to the movies. They're busy doing something else. And so it's the fragmentation of the audience, it's also the fragmentation. I think it's very important to keep this audience with over 50 with films that they're really going to see, and which normally they support local films, and we don't get anymore.
You're nearly all producers, correct? Yep, nearly all. Does that mean you're correct? Producers? Directors?
Yeah, correct.
Director. Okay. Oh, you're right. Okay. If I address this perhaps to producer come directors, a question really, which is, what is your business strategy at the moment? How? No, how do you survive?
T-shirts look pretty good.
One example is you incorporate a product placement or brand in production. That way you are free to distribute it for free, and then you work out some deal with sponsors and you get share.
But currently, isn't your model at the moment that you survive by making a film? It's a fee-driven business. Am I right?
No, I'm doing other stuff.
Okay, fine. So what's your plan then? What do you do?
Well, with my films, I hope that I can figure out, first of all, make them, it's not like looking like I'm going to be making blockbuster movies anymore. Like, God knows, I would love if someone gave me $20 million and said to me, go make a big budget film. But that's simply not the case. So what I'm trying to think about doing is, first of all, making it for as cheap as possible. Second, minimizing the risk by knowing that, or communicating with an audience before I've made the film and finding that, okay, I do know that there are people who do want this to get made. And having the audience involved in understanding that, like, involved in wanting to see it made. I want my audience to be involved in wanting to see the films made that I will make. And therefore, if you minimize the risk of that when you make the film for a certain amount of money, that really you can almost guarantee that you're going to get a good amount of that back. I just want to be able to make the next film and at least see, okay, even if I get, say with Indiegogo or something, some model like that, but I can say, okay, I've got this much audience, they're this interested in seeing the film, they've given me this much money, I'm going to be able to make the film, break even, and be able to make my next one. And hopefully, I don't know, for living, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make money out of this business or survive off of it. Yeah. I'm going to look at other things that I can do to support myself while doing what I have to do because I love it.
Well, like the Norwegian guy, have a very good social support system. He made his film on the dole, like social services paying for it.
But in Europe, nearly 80% of the funding for films, feature films, is public money.
80. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, because what you've got there, I mean, the traditional model basically is, unlike yours, traditional business model production company is I raise the finance on a hermetically sealed basis. I don't have any audience or any strategy for the audience, and what's more, my financial reward is through the fees. The structure is such that if I'm lucky, sell this film, I'm pretty certain I'm never going to get a penny. It's not going to go into overages, the royalty systems are terrible, the apartment or whatever it is, everybody else is going to go out before me anyway, all the financials and all that, so I'm just not going to get the film. I'm not going to get it. So the whole of the financial reward system on that basis is almost entirely around a fee-driven, I need to make the next one, I need to make the next one, I need to make the next one, okay? That's the model. That's the model, that's what it is. And that, in a sense, is kind of like, and there's a lot of conversation about IP and IP ownership, and we should legislate for it, and more IP should be left with the filmmakers and the creators and so on. But anyway, it's not really happening, and that's where it is because they, it's the money people that get it first. So that's that particular model, and that's a very hermetically sealed model, I think. Inside, and it's hermetically sealed, but I think it's also a structural model that is extremely hard for the majority of production companies to get out of, think outside of. For example, like you just said, because the alternative model is actually very risky. Because it's a risk-reward ratio. What I've got now is, the only way I've got now is I may have a direct relationship, a more direct relationship with audiences and revenue, but what I don't have is that kind of hermetically sealed production model, which I'm pre-selling it, which means that the risks associated could probably quite high. I haven't got like traditional funders and so on. I'm now doing this myself, and that's actually that's a very different financial model. I may be more rewarded.
They're both risky. I mean, the idea that the funding is there for every film that you want to make is, of course, nonsense. No. So the risk is that you won't get the money to make it.
But if you're starting as a production company, this is what's interesting about this. I'm coming to the end of this, but this is what's really fascinating. If you start from a production company, do you say that your business model is, I've got to keep making films to make money? That's my model. Or do you say, I'm going to have just like you described, or just been described in this, in most of the parts of the Pixar stuff, that my revenue model is based upon a flow of money, however I manage to get it, back from the audience directly back to me. And that is a hell of a different model. It's much more demanding, actually. It's a much more demanding model for the producer, because they now have to be marketers and entrepreneurs and salespeople and all sorts of stuff and all sorts of skills that actually, on the current model, is quite simple. You just need to produce your movie, and deliver it, do a budget and deliver it on time. Hopefully, if I'm lucky, it gets seen, and if I'm not lucky, I'm not financially affected.
But history tells us that the way to get around that ISO, what you call it, hermetically sealed model, is to become vertically structured. And what I mean, we're all sitting here because I think everybody's considering becoming vertically structured, so you're going to talk to your audience and you're going to reverse with your idea.
Correct. You're a distributor.
And that's as old as the hills, you know. Hollywood did it from the start of the silence, they became vertically structured, it works. You know, it becomes a good model. But the model you're describing is the producer. But if the producer wasn't the producer, but was a community, and that community of people had different skills, then it's a vertical model as part of a community where the different skills are shared and understood, and then that which feeds everybody.
That's a damn good model. Yeah, it goes back to the word cooperative and communal, but that is actually a really good model.
Cooperative. It made me cry to hear those lovely 60s ideals there.
I'm going to finish in a minute. Someone stuck their hand up.
Join us, you don't have to.
Yeah, I think the problem is that if every producer tries to become, vertically structured, of course, what you have is not just fragmented producers, but fragmented distributors. So I think the idea is how do producers come together and how do they begin to trust each other to actually pool the resources when it comes to distribution?
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's the point, actually. I mean, back into thinking about my day job on this. I mean, I'm working with Liz Rosenthal, actually. She's working with me on kind of this sort of stuff. And I'll finish on this point, really, is that we keep bumping up across this mutual benefits. And we just can't quite, at the moment, figure out what the right lever is, if there should be any lever of public finance or public money from my department, to actually encourage people to get together if they don't really want to get together in the first place. Is actually mutuality genuinely mutual? And if you try and engineer it, it's not mutual. But if they do want mutuality, then they will get together, and they don't need support, and then you can get on and do your vertically integrated structures by pooling your skills. Fascinating.
But isn't that what this conference is about?
Yeah, but boy, I'm telling you, there aren't too many producers. There's a lot of people out there that are not part of this.
That's people who are thinking with the old model. Like anyone could go away, and any speaker they've seen who they think is good, you could read their blog and you can email them, you can get answers from them. It isn't a closed system.
No, I agree with that. No, I agree with that. I wasn't saying that. I entirely agree with that. And there's open source. There's a lot of what goes on in this bit. Final question.
I think the last thing that hasn't still been too talked about is that right in the traditional system, in a lot of ways, you're actually getting people to see films that not necessarily are that good. You know what I mean? They end up walking out. The marketing and everything that's involved with it ends up that they're going to see films because and then they walk out going, oh, really, that was a shit film. Well, what this new model may do is force the content to really it's riskier because the content has got to be that much better for it to succeed.
I wonder.
I don't think so. I think most of the content I've seen so far is
well, it's got to be engaging. That's the word.
And I love the idea. And I've been in digital making for 25 years. I've come from Scandinavia.
I'm really sorry to break
we're going to have to stop.
Yeah, we are.
But content is
there's coffee and everything downstairs.
There's a nice wrapper.
Which does
a wrapper where you can put anything in. It's been like a full-time wrapper.
Which does demonstrate that you do need more than 50 minutes to do this. We have to stop.